Do you want your longevity business to crush it this year? You are in the right place. Every week, we're diving deep into cutting-edge longevity science and profitable business strategies. You'll discover what's working right now for top clinics and get practical ideas to boost your own business. I'm your host, Brett Wallace, and this is the Longevity Loop Podcast. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Longevity Loop Podcast. Before we begin, I just want to read a quick disclaimer for legal purposes. Before we begin, I want to clarify that I am not a medical doctor or a healthcare provider. The information shared today by myself and my guest, Peter, the Peptide Guy Riviera, is purely educational. Nothing discussed in this podcast should be considered medical advice. All content about peptides, longevity treatments, and health protocols is for informational purposes only. So they shouldn't be intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Every person's health situation is unique. And if you're interested in peptide therapy or any treatments mentioned today, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health regimen. And with that said, welcome to the show, Peter. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Brent. Good to see you too.
What I'd love to know is just your journey into peptides. Tell me and the audience a little bit about what brought you to peptides, and you're clearly knowledgeable in peptides because we've talked a lot in the past about it.
Yeah, we have.
What's your background and what brought you to peptides?
It's funny you asked that because the last couple of days I've been thinking a lot about my life and in this realm and everything else, and kind of how it started and where did my passion come from, right? What's my story? Because I'm always asking other people, tell your story. What's your story? And I think mine starts with, and I apologize if I get a little emotional. It's both my parents passed of AIDS. My dad passed when I was 17 in high school, and he died in 3 months. Nobody would help him in the hospital. They basically let him just evaporate. And it was probably, it is the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And by accident, he gave it to my mom. And then several years later, when I was 21, she passed away from it. For years, for the last year of her life, the doctors were telling her, Denise, you're not going to make it to 40. You should get your business in order and everything else. And she looked at the doctors and she said, I'm going to live to 40. So that was in January. My mother's birthday is December 10th. My mother passed December 19th. So she lived to 40, and she was just super strong and just not willing to give in to what the doctors were telling her. She knew her diagnosis, she knew where she was going, but at the same time, she also knew in her heart and her passion that she was going to make this journey to 40. Like that was her goal, and she did it. And I think that kind of started my whole wanting to help people, especially people, initially that I loved, my parents, but I couldn't save them. But there's so many other people that I can help and improve their lives. So I got into fitness. So I did that for a while, and I've been a personal trainer, strength coach for over 30 years now. And then what brought me into the peptide world was I had a partial tear in my Achilles tendon, and I was actually a park ranger at the zoo, and I couldn't perform that job anymore. So I was seeing another doctor for 4 months with a plastic boot and stretching and all this other stuff. And he was pretty much guaranteeing me I'd never walk or run the same or anything like that. So I found BPC 157 and I was like, okay, this thing sounds amazing. So I did all my research on it. My degree happens to be in biology, and I deep dove into it, and I took it for 2 months, and it literally healed my Achilles tendon. And I was like, yes, I found it. So then at that point, I was 235 pounds. This was like, right after COVID. So nobody was moving, right? Nobody was going anywhere. So I was eating clean, still working out, but I just couldn't move my weight past a 10-pound loss. And it was really, really frustrating, especially being a fitness professional, right? I had every tool in the book, but it just didn't work. So I figured that it was my insulin resistance. So how do you, get that under control? Well, this is when semaglutide came out and tirzepatide had just launched on the market. So I was like, hey, you know what? I want to do the 2.0 version, because that's all I kept reading was how much better it was. So in 4.5 months, I lost 45.
Dang.
Yep. And that's when I knew peptides was the next level. And I believe in doctors. I believe you need to go see a doctor. You need to get regular blood work done. You need to make sure you're hormonally balanced, but there's a way that medicine, and let's say alternative medicine, if you want to call it peptides, that can kind of meet, and they can work. There's a cohesiveness there, right? And the more that, your wonderful show, introduces people to peptides and longevity, the more that people can actually realize, hey, you know what, we can coexist. It's not one is better than the other, but there are really good positive things about peptides that really can change somebody's life. So I think that's kind of, where my passion comes from, is what has happened in the past in my life, which I couldn't prevent. And I didn't have the knowledge to even try to. But now I even see with some of the modalities that peptides are used in, they do have them for people that have cancer, or that have AIDS, or that are going through chemotherapy, or, or any of these things, Alzheimer's. There's just a plethora of knowledge out there, so it's exciting for me because I get to share it with other people. And like you said, it's the information, right? It's the education part, that they're not trapped in a bottle underneath all these prescriptions, and they don't have to be. And with the right medical professional guiding them, peptide therapies can be magical, to.
Yeah, I know in my life, through conversations with you, quite in-depth conversations, and other medical providers that I've worked with in the past, peptides are so amazing. And just double clicking on what you said, they're absolutely a complement to any existing things that you have and any existing goals or regimens. And obviously, you want to check with your doctor, professional, to make sure that they play well together. But peptides is such a complementary therapy to so many other modalities that, yeah, they play well, just fantastic. So if someone's new to peptides and this is the first time they're hearing about them, which I can't imagine, I mean, like we were just saying, there's not a lot of people that know about them, but I think anyone probably listening to this podcast probably has heard about peptides. But what exactly is a peptide? And you alluded to it a little bit, just, what you're just saying, but really, why are they getting so much attention now? They've been around for quite a long time. There's a history to them, certainly, but they're getting a lot more attention lately, and we've been hearing a lot more about them. So what exactly is a peptide, and why are they getting so much attention?
So a peptide, in short, is just a small amino acid chain. That's all. It's a protein. That's all it is. And we naturally produce a lot of them, actually, so BPC 157, perfect example, is actually made out of our gastric juices in our stomach. The pancreas secretes insulin, which is a peptide. And most people don't know that. Even people that are taking insulin have no idea it's a peptide. So it's, it's radical in that sense. What the second part of your question was?
Well, just like, why is it getting so much attention now? I mean, peptides, certainly probably even before the 70s, but I feel like Russia or the USSR was the, had so many of their athletes on that, and they've been around forever. The safety efficacy profile is extremely safe, but just why all of a sudden are they getting, this even predates GLP-1s, but as far as that.
I agree. Yeah. So I think they're getting so much more attention because you're starting to see mainstream doctors that have a social media platform, starting to talk about them more. And I think that also brings it out more. So guys like Dr. Peter Atita have spoken about it. Dr. Tina speaks about it. The godfather of peptides, that's what I call him, is Dr. Seeds. He's like the main guy, right? So they all have this now social media platform, and they're able to present it to so many more people, just by doing something like this, right? We can reach millions of people. So I think that's what it really comes down to. I also believe that the longevity space is becoming part of people's lives. I think people want to live longer. I think people want to be healthier longer. It's painful to see somebody struggle for 20 years with a disease and then die. And I think people are looking for alternatives to that. They're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that. Recently I was discussing this with the owners, and it's not just that the peptides help you, but if you're living longer and you're healthier, well, and you have a family around you and you have children that, well, that kind of makes everything better, right? So, they're not constantly worried about you. They're not, and again, it's the effect of all. It's not the effect of one. So, but you can start by taking care of yourself first. And then once you do that, everything else kind of falls into place, So I just think that the broader reach with social media and who's doing the broader reach is really making this longevity space and peptides really well known.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I feel like I've known about longevity for a really long time, and I have a 4-year-old boy, and that's kind of doubled down on my interest in longevity and living really an increasing health span, being stronger. And then also the advent of Brian Johnson the last year or two, you see that guy everywhere, and you almost can't mention longevity to someone, especially if they're not in the industry, without them saying, "Oh, you mean the guy that does the blood transfusions, or the guy on Netflix, or there's
there's always somebody, right? Yeah, exactly.
There's always something about that. It's
Yeah,
really interesting to see the whole post Peter Diamandis and all these really hardcore longevity guys, and then there's someone like Brian Johnson that you're talking about the leveraging of the social media platforms, along with Peter T, like you mentioned, Dr. Tina, et cetera.
yeah.
But
Right.
really just getting that message out there. And I've seen someone like Brian Johnson just make such waves with that. So with the peptides, what are the most common peptides that you work with? And what are some of the things that they help with, or health challenges or other things? Because I know you work with Soma Peptides, and they have quite a broad selection of peptides, really high quality peptides. Those are the peptides that I personally use. Again, thanks to your introduction to them. So what are some of the top ones that you use, and some of the applications to people that might be having challenges?
So one of the top ones, obviously, are the GLP ones, right? Because they're just so popular. I mean, every time you turn on the TV, you can't. It's like you can't avoid a Wegovy commercial. I mean, you just can't, right? The power of we. What a great thing to say, right?
Totally right.
Now it's Zep bound, and it's just like, so the marketing from big pharma has helped the peptide industry, I mean, and that's not a bad thing. But it's, the GLP ones are going to be at the top. What I'm seeing a lot more now is people start talking about mitochondria all of a sudden. And if for people that don't know what mitochondria are, they're basically the powerhouses of our cells. Now, since we're literally made all of cells, every cell in our body has a mitochondria. So if mitochondrial function falls off at some point, then the human being doesn't operate optimally. So there are peptides for mitochondrial function, like NAD plus, SS31, that I know you're familiar with. And if you fix things at the cellular level, that's when the body starts to respond better. So you can't fix the body without fixing the cells. So because it just won't work. It's like pumping, blood into a frozen steak. You might get a little bit in, but after a while, it just spills all over the place, So, you got to start small and then go big. So we got our weight loss ones, and we have our energy ones. Cognition is a big thing. So people that are ADHD, we have, they're coming out a lot. C-Max and C-Lank are really great for people to try to gear them off their medication.
Yeah, and that's what, I mentioned briefly to you in our pre-show, is that's what I use, and I use that this morning. And yeah, what a great cognitive,
absolutely,
improvement that I feel just with it. It's just one of the best nootropic stacks that I've used, for sure.
Yeah. Longevity, things like epitalin, to extend the telomeres out on the cells. There's, thymosin alpha 1, which helps with bacterial infections, viral infections. That's the one that they're actually treating people with long COVID with, and AIDS as well, and they're seeing really great success stories across the board. And, and then you have your other ones like PT141, which is a sexually heightened peptide. It was actually developed for women because it's a cognitive thing, and sometimes it gets shut off, through life, through stress, anything can just kind of, diminish that urge. So, that's one that people are looking to get back in their lives, especially as you get older,
Yeah.
So, I usually preface it as like, hey, it's great for date night, and I think, those are probably some of the top ones, right now that are buzzing around. One of the other ones actually that's getting a lot of play is like tesamorelin, so the natural HGH enhancers, and infusing your pituitary gland with peptides that help invigorate it to do what it's supposed to do is a good thing. So they are anti-aging. Everybody loves anti-aging. Anti-aging, people start going, what? Anti-aging? Improve collagen. I want that,
Right. Better skin. Woohoo.
Absolutely. Yeah. Copper is a mainstay, it's amazing too, because so many people don't even realize that actually copper is blue, so if they're getting a copper product off the shelf and it's a cream and it's white, yeah, you're probably not getting copper in that,
Right.
so you have to be really, really careful when you're sourcing your products from. And I think that's really where you're looking at the differentiator between, Soma and a lot of these other places is our care to detail, precision, and efficacy. And that's, so that's what separates us from pretty much everyone else, in my
Awesome.
opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I've had nothing but great experiences with Soma peptides. I've used quite a few over the years, namely through compounding pharmacies and directly through the doctors. But what's great about Soma is that as, just someone like me, that I can just order them, and obviously, again, this is just for educational purposes only, but,
Right.
You can really, it's fun to educate yourself and experiment, N of one type things and really get some great results. So, but, talking about practitioners, if a practitioner did want to bring peptides into their practice, what should they know about regulatory guidelines, the landscape of that, and compliance? Are there anything that they should be aware of? Or if a practitioner is looking to add, say certain peptides to their practice?
Yeah. I mean, legally, you should protect yourself if you're a practitioner, right? You have, your sign-offs and everything else. Knowing where you're getting your peptides from is huge. And this is where I see a lot of drop off. And especially the clients that I am working with is they were previously with another medical team and they were getting peptides, but then something went south. And it's either that the doctor switched up the pharmacy they were getting the old peptides from, and it either didn't work, or all of a sudden they were getting adverse effects they never had before. But that's because a practitioner didn't really look into where they were getting them from. They probably had their desk office manager do that. And that's where you can kind of get into that really weird, funky place where, some of the compounders aren't, let's say, being ethical. Perfect example is I know many people that were on tirzepatide with B12 from a certain compound pharmacy, and they couldn't believe how hungry they were. Well, usually that's an indicator that the B12 was so high that the tirzepatide that was in wasn't connecting, wasn't right. The proportions were out.
Wow.
So that it's that simple. So knowing where your stuff is sourced from, being able to actually speak to the people that actually are in the company, and I'm talking about the COO of the company. She's directly involved with all the accounts that we have. And if I'm Pete, the peptide guy, she and the owner, they're the goddesses of peptides because they know their knowledge base is just off the chain, and I really think it's knowing where you're getting them from. Having COAs is super important. I mean,
and a COA is
a certificate of analysis.
Okay.
Certificate of analysis. We post that on our website, so you know exactly when it was made, what lot it is. It has a number. Reporting to the FDA agencies, which we do. You want to know these things as a practitioner. Are you doing all the appropriate things? Because then at the end of the day, it makes that practitioner feel more comfortable going, you know what? I'm good with you guys. You're on ball, and I want to be with them.
For sure. So as a practitioner, so they're hearing this, they're like, peptides are awesome. So are there certifications or trainings that a professional could pursue before they choose to offer peptides to their client base?
Yeah. And I mean, everybody has their favorites, right? So there's, I've been a personal trainer, strength coach for over 30 years. How many personal training certifications are there, right? But there's there's a standard, right? So, if you have your degree, a CSCS certification is the top, right? For a personal trainer. And then you go all the way down. So, for me, it would be SSRP. Okay. Dr. Seeds. That's going to be the most medically sound to me, my opinion, and directly talking to practitioners. I've actually sent a lot of practitioners to take his certification, and they came back mind blown about how amazing it was. So that's going to be my go-to, is definitely be Dr. Seeds SSRP certification.
Yeah, and they also have the SSRP convention. I think it's coming up or just past, one of those things, but I've had the privilege to see.
Yeah, it's in September in Florida.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great place to start for sure. How do you recommend that practitioners educate their patients about peptide therapy, especially when they're distinguishing the difference between a peptide therapy and, say, some other therapy?
I think I mean, aside from taking the certification, which I think will help a lot of doctors get educated as well, I think that's really the important part is them deep diving into it, getting that knowledge base, looking at white papers. And what that means is the medical papers that were written up from, New England Journal of Medicine. JAMA's really great. Mayo Clinic has some really good write-ups on peptides. So there's the right information, and then there's your Reddit rabbit hole. So if I had the choice, I'm going to lean towards the other one and not the rabbit hole so much, But I think that's where medical professionals should go to start educating themselves, is definitely go to those resources in the medical field.
For sure. So when practitioners do have peptides in their, suite of tools, when they position themselves with peptides, and the broader, like everything that they offer, say, if they're doing DEXA scans and, I'm sure they're doing hormone replacement therapy, stuff like that. How would you recommend that they position peptides with that? You touch on it a little bit, but with the doctor, if someone comes in with like weight loss goals or longevity goals, or, and we'll talk about specifics of some more peptides in a second here, but anti-aging is a huge thing, right? GHK copper is a huge one in the skincare industry right now. How do you recommend that a doctor would approach that? So they've got all the knowledge from, say, SSRP, Dr. Seeds, giving them, here's the peptides, here's what they do, here's what they do for you. But how would a doctor or a clinician start talking about how to integrate these with other complementary, say, if someone is in there on testosterone replacement therapy, say, or something like that, like how would you position those complementing, say, if I was a patient on TRT, what would you maybe recommend, or how to approach adding a peptide?
Right. You first off, I think the way to go about it is scientifically. It's always going to be scientifically. Okay. So let's take, for example, TRT. If you're on TRT, a great complement to TRT is actually CJC 1295 with DAC. Now, DAC stands for the drug affinity complex. And what it basically does is it takes that CJC that may have a surge of 90 minutes, possibly 2 hours, to literally 6 to 8 days. Okay. So, and that would be the CJC 1295 with ipamorelin. That would give you that hour and a half to 2 hours. But the CJC 1295 with DAC by itself is 6 to 8 days. Now, so how do I know this? So scientifically proven, I can tell you personally myself, I had an A-lift surgery 7 months ago. So anterior lumbar interbody fusion. So that's what I call it, A-lift, because that's really long to say. So I had 3 discs replaced on my back with titanium, and I had a healing protocol. Well, during that time, I'm as well on TRT, and I couldn't get to my appointment, and I was without it for 3 months. So that being said, when I went to get my blood redone, the guys that do my blood, they looked at me and they said, yeah, you're at 1050. What are you doing? And I was like, you know what? I said, the only thing I'm doing that would affect it is this CJC 1295 with DAC that increases your pituitary gland function. It's anti-aging and everything else. So it increases my testosterone level as well.
Wow.
So yeah, so I can use myself as the example of where TRT and CJC 1295 works without a doubt. The weight loss ones are easy,
So what you're saying is like you weren't on TRT for 3 months, but you continue to take the CJC 1295 with DAC. And when you went in to get your blood test again, your levels were at 1050, you said 10. Yeah. Which 1050. Is anyone that knows the scale of testosterone, that's on the higher side of normal.
Right.
I think within the normal range, but just on the higher side of that. So,
and we talk great normal is 300 to 1200.
Yeah.
Most scales. So I want to be optimal, right? So we want to be at the higher end of that, right?
For sure. Yeah. I'd argue 300 is extremely low.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
I was 321 when I started. I know. So
yeah. You know
Yeah.
the feeling. So, wow, that's incredible. I've never known that about CJC. I know CJC has so many great purposes and use cases, but that's one that I had no idea about, that it can help maintain your testosterone levels. So
Yeah.
that's a really
And
cool
again,
one.
it was like, it wasn't meant to be tested that way. I did it. It was just kind of like an accident almost, I knew what I was taking at that moment, and then deep diving more into it, I was like, you know what, that makes perfect sense now.
Yeah,
So,
that's really cool.
yeah. So I also think too, so we'll go to what you were saying before. So we have a lot of clinics we work with as well, and doctors that are in the addiction world. So using a medication like a GLP-1, microdosing it, has been shown that to reduce or eliminate addictions, from gambling to smoking to biting nails to, anything that was disruptive in your life, it seems to wipe that out. So when you're talking about those kinds of doctors in that realm as well, they can actually transition people from the horrible medications they might have been on, opioid treatment and things like that, and really move them into a safer place with peptides. So that is a huge world right now, because we're all noticing at some point in our lives, and I can speak personally from my earlier story about my parents. I had PTSD. I've had PTSD my whole life since then, and I didn't realize that. But any loss of life, that, whether it's your parents, or it's a child, it's a sibling, it's a pet, it's anytime you lose something, it's traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you know how to deal with it appropriately, it stays with you, and you repeat the patterns of it, right? So it just starts to hurt you more and more over time. And I spoke to a professional, and she was like, yeah, she goes, you've had PTSD since you were 17 years old. And this was literally 3 years ago. And it was like an epiphany. Like, I turned 50 and I was like, oh my God, I get it now, But, I wasn't on any medications for it, but I would definitely rather be on a peptide for it, than getting hooked on an opioid or whatever, and we see what that does, right?
100%.
Yeah. So the integrations are really vast with practitioners. You just have to say, okay, what are my wants? And then what are my needs? And then where do we meet them in the middle? Because the last thing you want to do, I would think, as a practitioner, or even in my sense, is, I call it getting you hooked on their crack. You know what I mean? Like, that's the last thing you want to do that has an adverse effect on them, because you're compounding the original problem with another problem. And then at the end of the day, you really didn't help that person the best way you actually possibly could, because either you didn't know about peptides, or B, you just didn't see the relative existence and didn't educate yourself enough. And I think that's where we're at now, is there's so much education out there now, and it's positive, that doctors are really starting to say, hey, you know what? Let's start you on this medication because we think you're here, right? But once we get you down here, we can transition you to something easier that you can maintain yourself, and that you can do the rest of your life if need be, and it has no adverse effects. And actually, it'll have positive effects on your entire life. So, yeah, it's like,
well, it's just so funny. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It was just so funny that you just reminded me there, when you're talking about the GLP-1s with the addiction, is that I just read an article the other day that junk food companies are fighting back against GLP-1s because they're so effective that they're seeing a loss in profits. And so what they're doing now is putting some sort of additive in there that actually bypasses the GLP-1 receptors.
Wow. Gangster.
And so it makes junk food addictive again. And I'm like, man, those jerks. I cannot believe that. Like,
that is gangster.
Right.
That is so gangster.
But it just speaks to how effective it is. It's like if these companies, or, whoever's selling this junk, see their profits go down, and then, then they're like, well, how do we fight this? Like, how do we fight this? Like, oh, let's bypass this whole like circuitry to make them addictive again. I'm just like, oh man.
And most people don't get that, just kind of go through their day to day, and it's fine that they do, as everything else is, that, and they're like, how could they do that? Why would they do that? It's only 1% to 2% loss. Well, if it's $1 billion company and you lost 2% of your business, you'd want it back. Okay. So, I mean, and like you said, you have to really navigate and weave your way through this stuff. I mean, I saw the other day in the news, orange juice is like, Tropicana's going out of business because people are eating less sugar, which is great, because that was the whole premise, was that sugar wasn't regulated. And if you have sugar and you're a kid and you keep getting sugar, 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 and you do it as a teen and as an adult, well, guess what you wind up with? Gain. And then you get diabetes, and then you get cancer. And then there's medications for all that, right? So you got to start, when you're young. There's 2 times in a child's life, there's ages, and the most relevant one, I think, is age 13 to 14, if I can remember in my old brain here, where you gain the most fat cells. And those are the fat cells you're going to have the rest of your life. But if you have a poor diet in your preteen ages or your beginning of your teens, that's usually an indicator of if you're going to be a heavier kid or not and a fat adult. So, when we watch these young people eating and we watch what's on TV and you see the ads and everything else, they're sucking them in, and they're pulling them in with the food. And like you said, the GLP-1s, they might not make you want those French fries anymore. And that's okay, because there's better alternatives.
For sure.
I mean, you could have high quality sweet potato fries, if that's your thing, So again, it's navigating through this whole kind of quirky thing and figuring out where it works for you.
Yeah. And I also feel like it's about breaking the cycle, right? Once you kind of get in that, I know I've transitioned away from drinking for the most part. And when I first started doing it, I was just like, just always looking for something, like a beer or, and it wasn't like I was drinking that much. It's just like at the end of the day, you like a cold beer and it's hot out here in Texas or in Arizona where you're at.
No, absolutely. It's a thing. I mean,
and it's just like, but breaking that cycle, which for me, it seemed like is 3-4 weeks. And then all of a sudden it's like, don't crave it at all. And now I think back, I'm like, that's so weird that like, I was just always wanting a beer, even though, it's like, I'm not drinking now and I feel just totally fine with it. Now I'll just have a Topo Chico with lime or whatever. And it's amazing, but exactly. It's like that thing. And then also having something like a GLP-1 or some other thing, peptide or alternative, whatever, to break that cycle. And then you can get on with your normal life and get there. So transitioning back to longevity, what are some of the most promising peptides in the longevity space right
now? You can go with any of your growth hormones, ones, that invigorate your naturally growth hormone. So CJC 1295, with or without DAC, with ipamorelin. Esamorelin is a big one. Ceramorelin is still hanging around. It's one of the older ones, but a lot of people, they're creatures of habit. So if it works for them and they love it, they'll keep doing it, So, you're seeing those. Copper is a mainstay for anti-aging. So there's products out there, or there's we'll be offering soon. It's called Glow, where you basically combine BPC, thymosin beta-4, and then you combine copper. And that kind of is your like anti-aging, skin beautification. A lot of med spas and practices are using that.
Nice.
That combination. Yeah.
And is that going to be as a nasal spray or an injectable?
I'm not sure on that yet. I'm going to probably say it's going to be an injectable, just because BPC does not do well nasally.
That makes sense.
It's a gut one, so it doesn't work well going to the brain. We've done the testing and it wasn't viable enough. And we actually have just launched 8 nasals, which is great and cutting edge. And we're the only company actually that is clinically dosed nasal sprays.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw that on the Soma website. The addition of some nasal sprays, which is really exciting.
Yeah. But what's important is the dosing, right? So if you're an injectable, the dosing protocol, how many units you need to take about. With a nasal spray, it's very difficult to know that, right? So even your over-the-counter ones, or even the ones you get in a prescription from your doctor, it's 2 to 3. Well, how many grams am I taking? What's the strength in 2 to 3, But ours literally are clinically graded to pump a certain amount of milligrams per pump.
Nice. Yeah, that accuracy is nice.
We went that far. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, and this answer might absolutely be the same. So we just talked about longevity, lifespan. So what about health span and the peptides that are circulated around that to help your health span? And I fully understand a lot of these are almost the same things, but I know there's a distinction between, at least with the doctors I'm seeing now is Merrick Health. And with Merrick, they always differentiate like, okay, do you want to focus on a long life or like getting the most out of that, so it's health span versus lifespan, and it's just like, kind of tuning that into like we're there. So there's obviously going to be different peptides that help with different, areas of your life. So what about the health span part of the peptide world?
I would say again, so we have to go back to what your want and need is, right? And then kind of find that out. So if I'm wanting more energy, then there's going to be NAD plus for mitochondrial function. There's going to be SS31 for mitochondrial function. If I want to improve my cell functionality or the telomeres of the cell, it's epitalin. So you're going to use those. Copper still, again, anti-aging. It kind of reverses.
And when you say copper, you're talking about the GHK copper, right? Yep.
Yeah. GHKC. Like I just talked about the anti-aging. Your anti-aging, slowing the aging process down, so you're living a healthier, longer life. So the health span and longevity, they do this. They're meeting in the middle, and you're going to live healthier and you're going to live longer. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't imagine anyone really arguing with that. Unless your life is just absolutely miserable, living a longer, healthier life is really where it's at. So what's on the horizon with peptides? You say in the next, I don't know, I feel with like the advent of AI, everything is so sped up. My kind of original question was like next 5 or 10 years, but it's probably more like the next year to 5 years.
Yeah.
It's so there. Is there anything on the horizon with peptides or delivery systems or something that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I think I'm excited about the nasal sprays because I think we'll see more of them, which cuts down on the injecting because at the end of the day, it's hard to be a pincushion 5 days a week.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
I even get to that point where I'm like, I need weekends off. I think pills are going to be more prevalent now. I think pills are going to be a better option. When you're making a pill, though, you need to make sure and ask the question of, is this going to be bioavailable? And bioavailability means, will it survive the stomach acid and get to the place in my intestines where it's going to be uptaken in the system? And most pills right now aren't. I know Soma's working on some right now, and our scientists are pretty much off the chain, so they figured it out. And you'll be seeing that probably, hopefully the next month or so, pop up on our site. I see some topicals as well. We're coming out with a copper serum we're releasing soon as well. That is just amazing. And I've used it on my A-lift scar and has literally reduced the scar by 70%.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think that world is going to start evolving, more of the topical, a lotion, shampoo to grow your hair. I shave mine, but, yeah. But, if you were just going bald, you could use a shampoo and it's not Rogaine, again, a naturally occurring peptide to help invigorate that hair growth. And most of those things where it comes to beauty and skin and anti-aging, all are going to have a copper base to them.
Yeah, I see quite a bit of that in the realm of skincare, that has the GHK copper in that. And then spermidine is another one that I don't think spermidine is a peptide though, but I do see that.
Well with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
It combines well with the copper and stuff and things like that. So yeah, it's the anti-aging, anti-wrinkle, again, people want to, they want to go get older, but they also don't want to look older.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the, the conundrum that like, as we age, we want to make sure to still look good because it's like, if you're 120, you might feel great, but if you look like a prune, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd still be happy to be alive, obviously.
Exactly.
But clearly your aesthetics is a big part of longevity because, looking good as you get into those older years and still feeling great, your skin elasticity and your skin health, I mean, that's the biggest organ on your body. So of course you want to take care of that just as much as you're taking care of most of your inner organs there.
Absolutely.
So with misconceptions, there's so many misconceptions around peptides. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you hear the most often, and how do you address those?
Misconceptions usually happen if there's an adverse effect after somebody starts taking a peptide. I've had some people have some adverse effects to swelling and their hair and things like this, and those are definitely in the realm of possibilities, depending on what peptides you take. But some of the funny ones are after I get off these GLP-1s, what if I gain all that weight back? Well, if you go back to the old habits, yeah, like it's not, the 45 pounds I lost isn't under my bed. right? It's just not going to pop out. I'm going to be 45 pounds heavier tomorrow, right? I got to get there again, right? So, I think that's the big misconception too. And I definitely like to say this for most people out there. Not everybody's social media story is real. Everybody likes to show the positive stuff. Peptides are not a cure-all. It's not a one-off. They're like the kick in the butt for what our body may need, depending upon what kind of peptide it is. But you have to put the work in. So the lifestyle change, it has to be food. It has to be exercise. It has to be weight training. As we get older, having more muscle is a very big deal. And people are starting to notice that now, because the elderly that are fragile, you'll notice one thing is when they fall, which they will, they usually injure themselves really bad. And then from that fall, they don't recover. So a lot of people that are falling and breaking hips are literally dying like 3 years later because they're not mobile anymore. Right. So there's a big issue there. Misconception, PT 141, am I going to have to go to the hospital if this erection doesn't go away? It will go away. Just don't overdose yourself with it. You'll be fine. It's not like, a trumped up injection or anything like that.
That reminds me when Viagra first came out, one of the disclaimers was like, your erection might last 6 hours. And, it's like, yeah, right. It's like, everyone's like 6 hours, give it to let's go.
Yeah.
Biggest,
but I'd say across the board, if I can give one piece of advice, is that less is more. The biggest misconception is, oh my God, you know what? I'm doing great at 20 units. What if I doubled it to 40, but I'm still losing weight, or I'm still feeling more cognitive, or I'm feeling better, but I want to feel better faster, And again, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon, right? So less is more. And that's what I would encourage anybody who's either looking into peptides or in peptides, is less is more. And to be honest with you, that's why all the negative press came out with those Ozempic and GLP-1s, is because the dosing was inappropriate for people. Either strength or dose was wrong and incorrect. And when it got to that point where the dose was so high and people were on just such a high, just milligram per milliliter dose, it was causing all these problems when they were losing at a quarter of the dose that they were taking. So it made no sense to keep titrating them up. So, you have to act responsibly as a professional, as a medical professional, to give that advice, is to say, less is more, and I give that to my clients constantly. I'm like, hey, listen, if you're losing 1.5 to 2 pounds a week, you're acing it. Like, if you've got that weight to lose, you're doing that, good for you. You're not going to lose all 45 pounds in a month. That's when it's dangerous. That's when your system starts getting all crazed. That's when you see the massive excess skin, and all that kind of stuff hanging there. You don't want that. You want to do it the right way, and I really believe that getting that education, like we talked about, and from the proper sources, the proper resources, and explaining that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. These are not the cure-alls, it's like when Fen came out, right? And everyone was like, oh my God, I need Fen, and it was debilitating for a lot of people though, right? Because they were like, well, if one pill does it, maybe I should take 4. That'll be better. And then you started seeing the cycle. And that's really what happened, was people were overdosing on it, and it ruined their bodies and their lives. And some people lost their lives. Like, it became a really bad thing. And that's when medical weight loss really got a bad stigma to it. So, people raise an eyebrow, look where your stuff is coming from. Make sure it's properly sourced. Make sure you give proper direction in the use of that peptide for the need, and don't overprescribe a peptide when it's not needed. And I think that's the most, if you stay in those lanes, I think you'll have great success.
And be patient. Patience is a virtue here. So it's like not going overboard. Well, like you just said, it's like more of a good thing. And it's like, no. You just have to be patient.
Yep.
Let it work.
Yeah.
Change your habits, and you will see results. Might not be as fast as you want, but they'll come. They'll come for sure.
It's a lifestyle change, because at some point your body will take over, and you need it to, and you want it to, and that's really what it comes down to. So
practitioners and clinicians that want to learn more about peptides, and we're talking beyond, say, the certifications that they get at SSRP, what should they do? What would you recommend beyond just the standard certification process about learning? Like, how should they reach out to you, or reach out to Soma, or what would be like the next step that they would want to take?
Absolutely. They can definitely reach out to me at, responsiblepeptides@outlook.com. Go to the Soma website as well. You can learn from doing a peptide consultation. We do actually have medical professionals actually that work with us as well. I happen to be the peptide consultant. We can get you connected with their COO of our company who oversees all the accounts. And I told you has more wealth of knowledge in this space than.
And that's Whitney, right?
That's Whitney. Yep.
Yeah.
Whitney Kendrick. Yep. So she'd be the one that is going to be the brain of the operations on how to get you and your practice up and running. And again, doing it the right way and having the right business model and helping you along the way too, because, medical professionals are medical professionals in what they learned at school. Some of them aren't as business savvy, so it's nice to have an organization or group like ours, in Soma that can kind of walk you through and say, hey, listen, this is how we work it. This is how you could work it. This is how you can utilize your peptides to actually help your business grow and help your patients, because at the end of the day, we're in this space because we want to help people. And that's really it. Like we really do. We want to touch everyone though. We're just not looking for a group of people. We want to touch everyone. And I think that's the biggest thing. So when you have a group of individuals that really are coming from the heart and that are just so emotionally connected to this for their story because of their stories, and we all have one, and our slogan is every body has a story with body being circled, and because we do, and that's how we connect as human beings. And I think that's what's the most important part is when you work with myself or individuals at Soma, you get that feeling. It's like, you're not just a client, you're like family, and that's how I like to treat everybody that I interact with.
That's awesome. That's an awesome note to end on, Peter. So Responsible Peptides at outlook.com. And then somapeptides.com is Soma, of course, and obviously a Google search will get you there. Thanks, Peter, for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you as per usual.
Absolutely.
And thanks. And then hopefully, and then we'll be going live here with this episode here pretty soon. So look out for it.
Excellent. Will do. Thank you so much, Brent. I appreciate you. And thank you for supporting Soma.
Oh man, my pleasure, man. Soma's been great.
Awesome. Thanks.
This is the Longevity Loop podcast.